We already talked about the sudo command. What we didn't discuss is how you can configure the sudo command so that it allows this and that user to gain temporarily root privilege on your system. Okay, we have been using so far the default setting, which is in an Ubuntu installation. The first user that you create during your installation procedure is actually going to be added automatically to what is called the sudoers file. It's going to be also added to a sudo group. And that alone is going to be enough for that user to be able to perform every kind of operation the root user could perform. Okay, all you have to do is when you want to perform that operation, you type sudo, you prefix your command with sudo, and that's it. So two things happen is that one, the system makes sure that you have permission indeed, that you are a sudoer, and that you have permission to perform that specific operation. Okay, we're going to talk more about that in a few seconds. And it also logs what you have been doing. So this is very important. It's much better to actually know how to configure your sudo command correctly, and when you need to give some privilege to other users on your system, on your server, or your workstation, you can actually give them just the amount of privilege they need, okay? And whenever they do sudo and they try to do something else, like for example, they try to add a user when you didn't allow them to do that, they're going to be prevented from being able to do so. So it's better than giving them full privileges, right? It's also better than giving them the root password, because every time a user is trying to perform a sudo operation, that user is going to have to enter their password to verify it's really them. And the system is going to actually log what that user did with sudo. So imagine that you have like a server and three of you are administrating that server, managing that server, okay? Someone is in charge of managing user account, another person is in charge of managing, I don't know, printers, etc., connected to the server. Doesn't matter. The bottom line is that you have three different accounts, three different usernames on that system that have the need to access some of the root privilege, but not all. Okay, so typically that would be a great use case for the sudo command and the sudoers concept as a whole, where you would assign to each only the privilege they need. So principle of minimal privilege there applies, and you would be able to keep a log of what everyone has been doing on the system, thus allowing you when something goes wrong and breaks to look through the log and figure out who did what and how things broke and who is responsible and so on and so forth. Back to the mechanics of sudo. The sudo utility is configured by using a file named /etc sudoers. So this is where the name sudoers comes from that you're going to hear a lot. So if I try to edit that file logged in as user tux, well, it's going to tell me like, there's a problem. So even gedit here is telling me, I cannot open that file, you don't have permission. So it is a sensitive system level file, okay? So what we need to do is we need to ask permission to actually edit. So we need to use sudo. And then, lo and behold, we can see the content of that file and even edit it if we want, okay? So it's a bash syntax file, so meaning that the pound sign is used as a comment. Everything else on the line is going to be commented. And you can see that we have actually two main things I want to get your attention to. We have aliases, okay? My brain was caught reading here what's on the screen. So we have aliases. Aliases are really practical, okay? Aliases allow you to do things like specify, for example, a nickname for everyone that is, let's say, to be considered a power user on your system. So there is a syntax to specify user alias, okay, alias. So user alias. So there's an underscore here that I completely missed. Actually, the underscore is there, but for some reason it's not displaying So I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but just when you type it, make sure that you type your underscore here, okay? And then tabulation, and I could say, for example, project members, okay, are user tux sudo, and that's it. And maybe tux too, okay? Not even sure that one is still on my system. But bottom line, I'm just illustrating the syntax here, okay? So you specify that you want to define user alias, and you can now see the underscore, by the way. You specify you want to define a user alias. You give a name to that user alias. Convention is uppercase, space equals space, and then a comma separated list, comma and space separated list of username. And then you're going to be able to refer to all of those users below in the syntax we haven't yet covered with the name project. So that's what an alias is, okay? So you can do the same thing with host. So I refer you to the main page of /etc/sudoers, okay? It's going to give you all the full syntax, and you can refer to it when you need to. Right now, we're just going to go over the basic syntax. So we can create a user alias. We can create, for example, a command alias. So guess what is going to be named. Actually, it will be easy to not guess it right because it's abbreviated. So CMND command alias, and then you can say, for example, this is an alias for the commands that are used for printer operation. Okay, so I'm putting some alias to a command, and I can separate them, and I'm going to make up stuff, you know, like LPQ, LPT, etc. So these would be executables that all relate to printer operation. So you can say these are all the like this. Let's use an example that's a little bit meaningful. These are the print managers. These are the users that need to be able to do stuff with the printer that's connected to my workstation or my server. These are the commands that are used, you know, to do anything with the printer, for example. Okay, and then we have this weird syntax. So there are different types of alias, like host alias, etc., that you can also define, okay? But what is most important for us is to look at actually this the syntax here. This is really the core of how you specify privileges when you are trying to assign sudoers rights, okay? So the first part of the syntax, hold on, let me see if I can find an interesting example here. Scroll down. Not much. Okay. All right. So we're going to make up our own stuff. All right. So when you specify user privileges, the first part of the syntax is who is affected. Who is affected by those privileges? So you could say, for example, user tux, and actually user tux should be there, or maybe it's in the file that is included. Yes, it is included here. So I'm going to recreate it just for you, like live. So I could say for user tux, I want to allow. So the first thing you're going to specify is pretty much where do you allow users to connect from. So we don't do server system administration in this class. So for us, it's not going to be really important. We are going to use all here to say, yes, I don't care where the user logged in for, but you could actually define networks in addition to host, etc., and say, well, I only allow that tux user to do any sudo operation when it's connected from remotely from a machine that is on my company's network, for example. So here we're going to leave that aside, okay? But in this case, we say all, meaning that we don't care about this. And then we're going to specify what kind of user you can act as. So again, we could define here a user alias here that say I'm going to act as a print manager, or I'm going to act as a supervisor, etc. Here I'm going to allow the user tux to pretty much impersonate anybody, and that's the default on the Ubuntu system. The first user you create when you install the system is going to have exactly those privileges, okay? And then you are going to specify what command the user can use. So in the case of Tux, again, this is the first user I created when I installed that Ubuntu system. I can log in remotely from anywhere. I can impersonate any user on the system. So I have like full access to do a su dash, Tux sudo, for example, and it's going to allow me to impersonate Tux sudo login as Tux sudo. And then all here means that I can run anything. So this is a base syntax, and an even more basic version of the syntax would be to use our example here, and this is probably the one that you're going to encounter most often, except if you become system administrator. You can say that all the users that are part of the printer alias, actually printer managers alias, okay? So this replaces the username that we had for Tux in this example. So all of those users, Tux sudo, and Tux2, are going to be skip the all, meaning they can log from anywhere, so it's assumed it's all. They are going to be able to use all the commands that affect actually the printer. So I use my two alias here, and it's a simplified version of the syntax. You can see that I don't talk about you can run commands as, okay? It's assumed that you are going to run the command as yourself, and it works in that case because those commands really, they are going to be able to allow you to affect the printing queue and stuff like that, okay? But you don't need to necessarily run them as root. Whereas here, in the default user specification for Ubuntu, the all means that we can actually run any command as anyone on the system. So this is a simplified version of the syntax that is more, that is closer to the kind of stuff you would have to configure maybe every day if you had a workstation and were just working as a developer on that workstation, okay? This is more, what I'm highlighting right now is more what you would have to configure if you are a system administrator on a shared server where you have a bunch of users and you want to make sure that you delegate some of your responsibility, but you do so with a principle of least privilege in mind, meaning that you don't want everybody to be able to execute any command from anywhere as anyone on the system, okay? That would be better still than to give out the root password to everybody in your team, okay? That would be much better actually because there is logging and stuff like that, as already explained. However, that would really not be an instance of the principle of least privilege. So from a security standpoint, that would not be ideal at all. So in this case, that illustrates that we can delegate actually to some of our more knowledgeable users the ability to manage actually the printing queue, but that doesn't mean that we allow them to do anything else on the system that could be possibly harmful. So there we go. This video was just a little high-level summary of what's happening in the /etc sudoers file. There's much more to it. I will expect you to be able to do things like what we illustrated here with printer managers and printer, okay? But we will not push it far beyond that in this course, okay? Again, this course is not focused on system and Linux system administration. It's more focused on people who want to work and be knowledgeable on a Linux system. So that's about where we're going to stop for this course, and we'll continue in subsequent courses of the Linux track.